Picture this, a moment that would change everything. 83 employees, all seated, all watching as your name is called out in front of every single one of them. Your access card deactivated while you're still standing in the room, a harsh reality. Your manager, smiling it seemed, in that moment, as security walks you to the elevator. Now, picture this, 48 hours later. That same manager, that same CEO, that same company sitting in a building that legally, contractually, undeniably belongs to you. And the lease renewal they desperately needed to stay in business? It was sitting on my desk unsigned. This is the story of the most satisfying 2 days of my professional life, and how a public humiliation became the most expensive mistake a CEO ever made. If you've ever been humiliated by someone who thought they held all the power, this one is going to feel, truly, very, very good. Subscribe to Twisted Truths, hit that like button, and stay with me, because the checkmate in this story took less than 48 hours, and it was absolutely worth the wait. My name is Nathan, and I need you to understand exactly who I was before I tell you what they did to me. I was not a junior employee. I was not someone who could be quietly pushed out without consequence. But they didn't bother to check. In 2009, right after the financial crash, I bought a commercial property in the business district of Leeds. Everyone thought I was crazy. Commercial real estate during a recession? But I had been watching the market for 3 years, and I knew something most people didn't. That area was going to become a tech and media hub within a decade. I was right. By 2014, the building had tripled in value. I leased the entire 3rd floor to a mid-sized marketing and communications firm, Pinnacle Creative Group, a 5-year lease, renewable. A year later, Pinnacle offered me a senior role as their head of operations. Gerald joined Pinnacle in January 2019. New broom, as they say. Within his first month, he had restructured 2 departments, replaced 3 department heads, and held a company-wide meeting where he used the phrase dead weight for separate times. I watched all of this from the back of the room, quietly, carefully. Gerald and I had a functional relationship for the first 6 months. Professional, distant. He didn't particularly understand what my role involved, and he didn't seem especially interested in finding out. The first real warning sign came in September 2019. We were in a leadership meeting, 8 people around the table, and I raised a concern about a client delivery timeline that I believed was unrealistic. Gerald looked at me across that table and said, in front of everyone, "Nathan, I don't remember asking for your input on this. Let the people who actually understand the commercial side handle it." The room went quiet. I looked at him, said nothing, and wrote down 1 line in my notebook. Then I turned the page and kept going. But I remembered. The timeline I warned him about? They missed it by 11 days. The client issued a formal complaint. Gerald blamed the delivery team. He always blamed someone else. Over the next 8 months, that pattern repeated again and again. My recommendations were sidelined, my team's budget was cut without consultation, and Gerald made a habit of talking over me in front of junior staff. I started to understand where this was heading. What Gerald hadn't done, not once, in all his restructuring and power plays and reorganizations, was read the building lease. May 14th, 2020. A Thursday morning, a time when the world and the company seemed to be moving forward as usual. Gerald called a company-wide meeting at 9 o'clock, and, as it turned out, it was a meeting that would change everything. All staff, all departments were required to attend, every single person in that building on the 3rd floor. I didn't know what it was about, and it seemed nobody did. Gerald stood at the front of the room, confident, hands clasped, with the expression of a man who had rehearsed this moment many times, it seemed. He talked about the company's direction, about needing to evolve, and about removing obstacles to growth, and, as he spoke, I couldn't help but wonder what was coming next. And then he said my name, a moment that, I must admit, was truly unexpected. A letter informing Pinnacle Creative Group that their lease on the third floor would not be renewed upon its expiry date, and that under the terms of the existing agreement, they had 30 days from that date to vacate. Margaret asked me if I was sure, and I told her I had never been more sure of anything in my professional life. She sent the letter on a Monday morning, 48 hours after I had been walked to the elevator by security. I'm told Gerald received it just before lunch. I wasn't there to see his face, but I heard about it from 3 separate people within 24 hours. Apparently, Gerald read the letter once, then read it again, then called his PA in and asked her to pull the lease agreement from the company files, the lease he had never once looked at in 18 months as CEO. And there it was, landlord Nathan Reeves, his head of operations, the man he had just publicly dismissed in front of the entire company, the man whose access card he had deactivated while he was still in the room. Gerald called me that afternoon. I let it ring. He called again. I let it ring again. On the 3rd call, I answered. He was calm, controlled, trying very hard to sound reasonable. He said there had clearly been a miscommunication, that the restructuring decision was nothing personal, that he hoped we could find a way to resolve the situation professionally. I listened to every word. Then I said, very quietly, Gerald, I'll have my solicitor send you the relevant documentation. I'd recommend getting your own legal team to review it as soon as possible. Have a good evening. And I hung up. Over the next 3 weeks, Pinnacle's board held 4 emergency meetings, and they instructed a commercial property lawyer who confirmed exactly what Margaret had already told them. The landlord had every legal right to decline renewal, and the notice period was valid. The company needed to vacate or negotiate a new lease on the landlord's terms. On new terms, my terms. Pinnacle came back to the table through their legal team, and they negotiated. I was measured, fair, and firm. The new lease was signed at a rate 31% higher than the previous agreement. And as part of the terms, I had it written into the contract that the head of operations role at Pinnacle Creative Group was to be reinstated. Not because I wanted to go back, I didn't, but because I wanted Gerald to have to sign his name on a document that said so. And he did. Gerald Sutton resigned from Pinnacle Creative Group 4 months later. I was told the board had lost confidence in his leadership, something about a failure to conduct basic due diligence. The 3rd floor of that building is still leased to Pinnacle, and they are excellent tenants. And every month, when the payment arrives, I think about a Thursday morning in May, an elevator, a deactivated access card, and a man who smiled at the wrong person. Here is what I want you to remember. Power is rarely where the loudest person in the room thinks it is. The people who make a show of control, who perform their authority in front of an audience, are almost always the ones who haven't read the contract. Do your homework, know what you own, and stay quiet, and let the paperwork do the talking. Have you ever been publicly humiliated by someone in a position of power only to realize later that you held something they needed? Tell me in the comments. I want to hear your story. If this one gave you chills, and I think it did, share it with someone who needs a reminder today that the loudest person in the room is rarely the most powerful. Subscribe to Twisted Truths, and you will get a new story every single week. Next week, a woman spent 11 years as a silent partner in a restaurant. Her business partner tried to buy her out for, essentially, nothing. She didn't just walk away. She took the name, the recipes, the staff, and opened directly across the street. I'll see you then.